I need to tell you about the day Diane Calloway pulled me aside at her daughter's birthday party and said something so quiet and so direct that I almost asked her to repeat it. Almost. I didn't repeat it because I had heard it clearly the first time, and some sentences are so honest they only hit you once. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Before I continue, tell me in the comments, have you ever had someone else see something between you and a person you care about before either of you was ready to admit it? Because I think you'll understand exactly what I mean before this is over. I had known the Calloway family for close to 4 years. Not the way you know your neighbors. Names, cars, occasional waves from the driveway. I mean the real kind of knowing. The kind where you fix the broken shelf in the garage twice. Where you know which aunt is difficult at holidays and how to keep her talking long enough that dinner stays civil. Diane Calloway was a retired middle school teacher with silver hair she kept in a clean braid and eyes that made most people sit up a little straighter. Her daughter, Marisol, was my coworker, then my friend, and for the last 2 years, the person I thought about more than I was willing to admit out loud. The party was in their backyard in Asheville, North Carolina. Marisol was turning 31. Diane had strung white lights across the fence, borrowed 2 folding tables from the church next door, and made 3 separate pans of her green chile enchiladas that were so good I had once driven 40 minutes specifically to eat them on a random Tuesday. The yard was full. Marisol's college roommates, her younger sister Priya, a handful of people from our office. Her father Ray, working the grill with a pair of tongs he treated like they were surgical instruments. I arrived around 4 with a bottle of sparkling cider because Marisol had mentioned she was cutting back on alcohol, and I didn't want to show up with wine and make her feel like she had to explain herself to anyone. She saw me from across the yard, and her face did something complicated. Not bad. Just complicated, the way a person looks when they're genuinely glad you're there, but also not quite ready for what your presence does to the room temperature. "Hey," she said, "you actually came. Why wouldn't I?" She tilted her head slightly. "You hate crowds. I hate strangers," I said. "I know everyone here." She laughed and reached for the sparkling cider. "Without sugar," she said, reading the label. "You noticed. I noticed things." That was the first thing I said that day that meant more than I let on. It would not be the last. I fell into the rhythm of the party the way I always did at the Calloway house. It wasn't something I planned. I moved the folding chair with the loose leg before anyone sat in it. I made 2 trips to the kitchen for ice without being asked. When Priya's boyfriend dropped a plate and looked mortified, I grabbed a paper towel before Marisol even turned around. That's just how I operated around people I cared about. I stopped counting favors. I stopped needing to be thanked for the small ones. At some point near the food table, Marisol's friend from college stopped me. Her name was Becca, and she had been watching me move through the yard with the expression of someone performing a quiet calculation. "You've been here 40 minutes, she said. "You've fixed a chair, refilled the ice, handed out 3 napkins you weren't holding, and talked Ray down from burning the hot dogs." I laughed. Was it that obvious? She looked across the yard toward Marisol, who was laughing with her sister. Then she looked back at me, only to anyone paying attention. I took that as a compliment and let the subject go. I was good at letting subjects go. Around 6, when the light went soft and golden, and Ray finally surrendered the grill to the enchiladas, Diane found me near the back corner of the yard, where the string lights ended and the real dark began. I had been standing there a few minutes, watching the party from the edges, which was where I usually ended up at gatherings like this. Not because I was unhappy, more because the edges were quieter, and I thought better with a little distance. Diane stopped beside me without announcing herself. She had a glass of iced tea in one hand and wore a pale blue cardigan, even though the evening was warm. "You've been doing that all afternoon," she said. I looked at her. "Doing what?" She nodded toward the yard, watching her. I didn't answer immediately. Diane waited. She was one of those people who understood that silence was not an invitation to fill. She had been a teacher for 22 years. She knew how to wait for the true answer. "I'm watching the whole party," I said finally. She looked at me the way she probably used to look at 11-year-olds who had explained their missing homework badly. Then she said, with a kind of clean simplicity that felt like a window being opened, "Nolan, have you ever told Marisol that you love her?" The string lights above me seemed to go very still. The party kept going. Someone laughed near the grill. Priya's boyfriend said something that made Priya groan. Ray asked if anyone wanted more salsa. All of it kept happening the way the world keeps happening when it doesn't know it should pause. I looked at Diane. She was not smiling like this was fun. She was not looking at me like she was testing me. She looked like a woman who had watched something from a careful distance for a long time and had finally decided to say the thing that needed saying. "Mrs. Calloway," I said. She held up one hand. "I'm not trying to embarrass you." She paused. "I'm asking because she won't." Something moved in my chest that I didn't know what to call. Not a surge, not a jolt. Something slower. The way a door swings open when you've been pushing against it your whole weight and someone just unlatches it from the other side. "She's my friend," I said, and I meant it as a complete sentence. Diane took a sip of her iced tea. "Nolan, I taught 7th grade for over 2 decades. I watched 11-year-olds fall in love before they had words for it. And what I learned is that when something is real, the people around it always see it first. Before you tell me what you think I should have said next, comment below and let me know if you've ever been the last person to see something that everyone else could already read. Because I was that person that evening. And Diane Calloway had just handed me a mirror. I didn't say anything for a long moment. Diane did not push. She stood beside me in the warm evening air and watched a cardinal land on the fence post at the end of the yard and take off again. I watched it too. Sometimes you need a few seconds to let an honest thing settle. Finally, I asked, "Does she know you're over here talking to me?" "No," Diane said, "and she probably won't thank me for it either." She paused, "But she won't correct it." I looked toward the center of the yard. Marisol was at the food table now, handing a plate to her Aunt Rosa, laughing at something the older woman had said. She had flour on the sleeve of her shirt from helping with the enchiladas earlier, and she hadn't bothered to brush it off. Her hair was loose, which she almost never wore it at work, and the string lights made her look like the kind of person who should always be in string lights. She looked up, almost at random, and found my face across the yard. Her expression changed for 1/2 second. Something softened in it, something adjusted, like a person unconsciously rearranging themselves around a presence they're already familiar with. Then Aunt Rosa said something, and she looked away. 1/2 second. I had been measuring time in 1/2 seconds for 2 years. I looked back at Diane. She was watching me the way someone watches the end of a movie they have already seen twice. Not impatient, just quiet, waiting for the part she already knew was coming. "How long have you known?" I asked. She smiled, and it was the warmest smile I had seen all afternoon. "The second time you came to Thanksgiving," she said. "You found her in the kitchen at 9 a.m, trying to fix the broken timer on the stove so dinner would stay on schedule. And you sat on the counter beside her for 45 minutes, helping her figure it out. You didn't fix it for her. You worked on it together. She pressed her lips together once. That's not how a man behaves around someone he thinks of as just a friend." My throat felt dry. I tried to find something to say that wouldn't be dishonest. Diane gave me the grace of not waiting for it. "She's been through a hard couple of years," she said. "After Marcus, she pulled herself a long way back. I'm not telling you what to do." She met my eyes directly. "I'm just telling you that a good man who already knows where the ice is and which aunt needs managing is harder to find than she lets herself believe." The party hummed around us, warm and golden and full of people who didn't know that a 60-year-old woman in a pale blue cardigan was doing something braver than anything I had done in years. Diane touched my arm once, lightly. Then she walked back toward the food table to refill the enchilada tray, and she did not look back. I stood at the edge of the yard for another few minutes. The cardinal was gone. The string lights moved gently. Ray was telling a story near the grill that required a lot of gesturing with the tongs. I thought about what Diane had said. I thought about 2 years of coffee runs where I always remembered her order. 2 years of covering for her when she was late to Monday meetings. 2 years of moving through her family parties like someone who already belonged there, noticing which chair wobbled and which aunt needed managing, knowing how she took her sparkling cider and why she wore her hair loose on weekends. I thought about Marcus, the name Diane had said quietly, the relationship that had ended badly 18 months before I really let myself look at Marisol. I thought about how carefully I had moved around that fact, how I had told myself she needed space, she needed time, she needed her best friend more than she needed anything complicated, and I thought about whether what I was calling protection was actually just a very comfortable kind of cowardice. I picked up a clean plate and joined the food line. Marisol was 3 people ahead of me. She had finished helping Aunt Rosa and was talking to Becca now, shoulders relaxed, one foot resting sideways on the grass, the way she did when she was actually comfortable. When I stepped up beside her, she glanced over without surprise, which was how it always was between us. No adjustment, no performance. I was just there, and that was already normal. "Nice party," I said. She looked at the yard with a kind of fond, tired pride. My mom went through 4 different tablecloth options. I personally witnessed it. Which did she go with? The cream ones. Obviously. She laughed. Yeah. A pause settled between us. Not uncomfortable, just long enough to hold something in it if either of us wanted to put something there. She took a piece of enchilada and said, without looking at me, "Did my mom ambush you?" I looked at the side of her face. She watched her own plate. "What do you mean?" I said, which was not technically a lie. "She does this thing," Marisol said, "with people she approves of. She pulls them to the edges of things and says honest things at them and then walks away like nothing happened." She finally looked at me. Did she? I considered my options carefully. I was good at being careful. I had been careful for 2 years. Then I thought about Diane walking back to the food table without looking back, and the way Marisol's face had changed for half a second across the yard, and the fact that I had been measuring half seconds for 2 years, and what exactly I thought I was waiting for. "Yeah," I said. She did. Marisol looked at her plate. Her jaw moved slightly. She exhaled once through her nose. "I'm sorry," she said quietly. That was probably weird. It wasn't weird. She looked up at me. Her eyes were dark and steady, and had the kind of directness in them that I had spent 2 years being careful not to meet for too long. "She means well," she said. "She just sees things." "I know," I said. "She's right." The yard went on around us. Priya was doing some kind of elaborate handshake with her boyfriend near the dessert table. Ray had finally put down the tongs. Becca was pretending to check her phone 3 feet away and doing a bad job of it. Marisol set her plate down on the edge of the food table. Her voice dropped just enough that I had to be close to hear it. "Nolan." "Yeah. What exactly did my mother say to you?" I turned to face her, the way I had not been fully turning for 2 years. "She asked me if I'd ever told you that I love you." Marisol went still. Not shocked, not confused. The stillness of a person who has been waiting for a sentence and finally hears it said out loud in a real room by a real voice. "And?" she said. Her voice was steady, but barely. "And I told her you were my friend," I said, which is true. But it's also the answer I give when the real answer scares me. She looked at me for a long moment. Around us, the party kept moving, warm and lit, and full of people who probably already knew. The same way Diane had known, and Becca had known, and maybe even Priya had known. "You're afraid of it," she said. Not accusing, just reading. "I have been." She nodded once, slowly, like she was placing a piece of information somewhere it could rest. "Me too," she said. That was it. 2 words. Me too. The most honest thing I had heard in 2 years, and it came in 2 syllables, standing beside the enchilada tray in her mother's backyard, with flour still on her sleeve. I looked at her. She looked at me. Behind her, Becca walked very deliberately in the other direction. "I've been waiting for you to get less scared," she said. Her voice was almost laughing. It was not quite laughing. Didn't want to scare you off. Didn't want to lose what we already had. I spent 2 years being careful not to lose what we already had, I said. I think I was so careful, I almost lost it anyway. She reached over and adjusted the sleeve of my jacket where the collar had turned up, the same way a person does when a gesture has become habit before they ever decided it would. She smoothed it down once, then left her hand there for a moment longer than the task required. For the record, she said quietly, I noticed the sparkling cider. I know. Without sugar. She smiled, and it reached everything. I notice things, I said, and this time I let it mean exactly what it meant. We stood there at the edge of her mother's food table for another minute or two, before Priya announced it was time for the cake, and the whole yard reorganized around the new event. Marisol picked her plate back up, and I walked beside her into the middle of the party, and this time I was not watching from the edges. Diane caught my eye from across the yard. She was cutting the first slice of the birthday cake with a clean, practiced hand. She didn't smile exactly. She just looked at me with the expression of a woman who had said the honest thing and let it work on its own. I gave her a small nod. She gave me one back. Then she handed the first slice to Priya and went about the business of feeding everyone. The drive back to my apartment was quiet. Not empty, quiet. The full kind. Marisol texted me at 10:43 that night, after the last guest had gone and the string lights were down and the folding tables were back in the church next door. She wrote, "My mom said to tell you she approves." I wrote back. She told me herself. 3 dots appeared. Then, I know. She was proud of herself all evening. I set the phone down, then picked it up again. I wrote, I should have said it 2 years ago. A longer pause this time. Then, you said it tonight. That's what counts. I looked at those 5 words for a while. They were the kind of sentence that asked nothing from you except to believe them. The kind Diane Calloway probably knew how to write because she had been saying things like that cleanly and without apology for 60 years. I set the phone on the nightstand and didn't second guess what came next. 3 weeks later, Marisol and I had dinner at a small place on Lexington Avenue with no agenda and no audience and no one to explain ourselves to. She wore a green dress and arrived exactly on time and ordered the sparkling water without sugar when the waiter asked if she wanted lemon. I noticed, she said before I could say anything. I know you did, I said. She smiled across the table like a person who had finally stopped being careful. And honestly, so had I. If this story stayed with you, please leave a like. And if you know the feeling of standing at the edge of something real and finally letting yourself walk toward it, subscribe. The next story is already waiting. If you made it to the end, comment. She noticed the cider.